Shattering. As heavy footfalls approached Nemala's dungeon cell, a foul-smelling substance dripped from the stalagmites above. An ominous wind swept debris and the scattered remains of the unfortunate souls that had died before her, to the four corners. Trepidation of what was to soon come caused the hairs on the nape of her neck to rise.
Nemala.
Silver's shrill voice reverberated through the palace dungeon.
Nemala.
Silver whispered again, while coaxing Nemala to consciousness. Hearing her name fall from her sister's lips felt as though 1,000 serpents' tongues were hexing her. Nemala sank her teeth into her lips, wincing as the crusted blood and chapped skin pulled tighter, causing yet another tear. She suckled her lips, hoping to garner some strength from drinking her own essence. The dungeon door groaned and creaked as Silver entered. Nemala slowed her breathing, praying that if she remained unresponsive long enough, Silver would grow tired of torturing her.
Come now, sister, have you truly been broken by a meager 3,000 lashes?
Her sharp golden talons stabbed into the ravaged and raw skin on Nemala's back. Silver pressed her hand firmly on Nemala's shoulders, pulling her body downward in a swift motion. The Valentium metal chains dug deeper into Nemala's wrist, causing Nemala to wince, but she quickly steeled the grimace on her face as Silver rounded her. When her sister didn't gain the desired reaction from Nemala, she pushed her figure with a slight bit of force, causing Nemala's body to pendulum from the chains overhead. With every swing, the tendons in her arms pulled further out of place. The chains dug deeper into Nemala's skin. The blood from the serrations on her wrist flowed into Nemala's hair, changing her silver tresses into a matted tangle of copper coils.
Silver. Must you drag this out further? Let's be done with this. This dungeon's dark aura cannot be good for your pregnancy.
The betrayal. At the sound of my husband's voice, my head snapped up. I struggled to look towards the left where I heard him, but my eyes were too bruised and swollen.
Oh, Mera, sister seems to be awake now. Was it the sound of your beloved's voice that helped you garner some strength, dear sister?
It can't be, no ma. Before his name could fall from my lips, I felt his presence. The scent of pine musk and pomegranate was unmistakably his. Mary leaned closer to me. The scruff of his beard grazed my cheek as he vomited forth his weak apology.
Forgive me, but for the sake of their sons, even the gods are capable of cruelty.
The physical pain I felt was numb compared to the shattering of my heart from my mate's betrayal. Son? No, Mary. We are destined mates. You can only bear children with your fated. She's tricking you, Mary. With as much strength that I could muster, I pleaded to him, praying that he would wake from whatever trance my sister had bewitched him.
Do you not understand, Nemala?
Mary's booming voice caused the torch flames to flicker as his mana swelled within the dungeon's hallowed walls.
For 900 years, I've stayed by your side. While you played the role of an empress, with no title, only to ever be considered as nothing more than the empress's mate. Watching time and time again as you tended the throne instead of the needs of me, your husband. But, the fates were wrong, pairing me with the likes of you. It took one night. One night in Silver's bed. The one with whom I truly belong for my seed to take root. Never has your womb brought forth life.
My body convulsed as the biting sting of his mana marred the skin below my navel. His fingertips felt ice cold as his palm sat atop my barren womb. His touch was unfamiliar and cold. Who was this male standing before me? The mighty god of thunder had been bewitched by my sister's fertile cunt. Bile coated my thirst-withered tongue as I swallowed the truth. Our mate bond was no more. The fates were wrong, the fates were wrong. I continued to ingest these words as a replay of our 1,000 years of matrimony played over and over. Memories tumbled into my mind's eye as if they were being washed ashore by my tumultuous sorrow. The longer I reminisced, the angrier I became. I could feel something within me breaking. I called forth my star mana in desperation, but my magic lay dormant. Finally, I peered into my inner soul and saw that my soul stone was shrouded in a hazy, dark miasma. I hung helplessly in the palace dungeon for 3 moons, trying to think of every possibility and scenario of how this all transpired. The only thing I could deduce was that the Dark Mags had a hand in this. Only one thing could render me, the Star Empress, powerless. The Vader Bloom, a cursed flower that grew every millennium in the Void God realm. It was believed that the Dark Mages were descendants of the Void God, which the Council of the Heavens thought was nothing more than rantings of a fanatic cult. It was careless not to have destroyed his lineage when I killed him eons ago.
Let us be done with this, Silver. The fates of karma should not be taunted further.
Merry removed his hand from my body. Where he once stood was now empty. The warmth from his body was replaced with stale dungeon air. Silver's jewel-encrusted tunic scraped the floor, warning me she was once again standing before me.
Dear sister, Mera wished for you to have a peaceful end. It's beautiful really that he still cares for you, despite your many shortcomings.
A shadow cast over me, forewarning me that Silver was holding something near my face. The icy prickling sting of the Vader Bloom lashed out at me as Silver held the flower closer to my nose.
Simply inhale the rest of the Vada pollen, Nemala, and you'll fall into an eternal sleep. Rest now.
Mary's coarse voice was full of mock sincerity. As if he was doing me a favor by granting me an eternal slumber. Ah, Silver clicked her tongue and spoke only loud enough for me to hear.
I am not as nice as him, sister. The Dark Mages gifted me something even greater than the Vada Bloom.
BZZZZ. I felt the fiery hot sizzle of his electricity washing over me. Then, unknowingly, a spark reignited my soul stone, causing my star mana to trickle to the surface.
What have you done, Silver?
Mary's voice boomed, his rage causing the beam overhead to crack. My weakened body hit the hard dungeon floor as my overhead chain disintegrated by his thunder blast. Silver looked at Mary with a furious glare as she clutched a small metallic dagger in her hand.
She must die, Mera. Do you truly think that if she wakes from the Vada sleep, be it a decade or millennia from now, she would not seek to kill our children or children's children? She must die.
As they argued, I called forth every sliver of star mana I could. I reached and summoned every star in every galaxy that I had ever created.
We agreed on an eternal slumber, Silver. It's a sin against the gods to spill the blood of an immortal.
I love you, dear Mera, but you try my patience. The Dark Mages gave me the Soul Stone Dagger, the only weapon capable of killing our kind. With this, our children can be safe. You can take your rightful place as Emperor, and our sons will follow in their father's majesty.
The sheer audacity of their cruel plans infuriated me, but I fervently continued to draw forth my mana. I would rather the heavens and all my hands had created be destroyed, rather than giving them the satisfaction of seeing their plans come to fruition. Silver sauntered to Mary's side, placing her opaque hand upon his broad, muscular chest.
Beloved, for the sake of our children.
Mary reluctantly agreed and turned his back to me with a hesitant nod. Unwilling to watch as Silver stabbed me with the Soul Stone Dagger. I couldn't fully make out her visage, but I knew Silver was smiling. Her excited raspy panting made my innards knot up. Then, just as the dagger raised high in the air, I finished my incantation. Depolvir in pulverum, uti crea padam. Ad oblivionum revita. Nasai aliquando, from dust to dust. As I create, I shall destroy. To oblivion. I shall return to be born once more. As the dagger pierced my heart, a blast of star mana burst forth from my soul stone. The faint wail of Silver's screams could be heard far off in the distance, but I no longer cared. For I was now one with the primordial. Before Silver could kill me, I imploded my soul stone from within. My death would not be at the hands of my enemies. I would rather be shattered amongst my heavens and become one with my stars. For they did not deserve such an honor. The mines. Dust and sediment filled the air as the sledgehammers of the flightless ones pierced the wall of the obsidian rockstone. Dig. Drag. Dig. Drag, the mining team chanted in unison. The laborers' featherless, hardened bodies glistened with sweat as they gripped their handles and pushed onward, deeper into the trenches. If they kept their pace, they would break into the inner core. The closer the mining unit got to the dormant lava flow, the darker and more valuable the obsidian stone would be.
Let me see 2 casts worth of black stones, and I'll grant this unit 5 gallons of Hawkeye ale,
yelled the shift manager. His mangled beige feathers ruffled slightly. Pebbles and dust hit the floor as Gentry shook off the volcanic rock and soot from his plumage. The flightless miners yelled in agreement as they continued with their mining task.
Gentry swallow.
The shift manager turned his head to the side at the sound of his name. His dark brown eyes fell upon Arette of the Magpie clan. Gentry stiffened. If Arette was here, it meant Micah was attending to his nightly duties in the capital. Gentry bristled as he flew down to the valley platform towards Arette. Arette studied Gentry as he glided down, approaching him cautiously.
How can I be of service, Lord Magpie?
Humph. Arette made a pretentious guttural noise. Then looked towards the lush green lands of the capital off in the distance.
A new shipment of flightless slaves has arrived from the trading post. I hear your stepbrother is in charge of this shipment.
Arette looked round before uttering his next sentence. Pulling his white and black wings towards his face to conceal his intentions.
The lords of the capital aren't too happy with the way Micah is governing the knights.
Arette's beady, black eyes scanned their surroundings once more before continuing.
If you understand, nod your head.
Arette's voice was calm but was laced with authority. Gentry cleaned his hands upon the back of his pants and then wiped the sweat from his brow.
Yes, I understand.
Gentry frowned and looked at the ground in anger.
Good. See, I told the lords you had sense, unlike your stubborn oaf of a brother. All we need to know is when Micah's shift starts and ends. Well, the route he takes would help as well, so we can ensure we stay clear of surveillance knights.
Arette puffed his chest out, his primed wings stiffened. He was a prideful magpie that thought way too highly of himself as he laid out his demands. Gentry wanted to pummel the arrogant bastard's face in. The magpie clans were some of the biggest assholes of the avian race. But Gentry continued to look at the ground and summon forth his patience. There was nothing to be gained from lashing out. Unlike Micah, a mere swallow like him would be killed and buried with no headstone if the lords demanded it so.
I'll find out what I can, then give your man the information at the usual spot,
muttered Gentry. Then, with a swift flap of his wings, he returned to shaft number 27 high upon the cavernous walls. Stroll through the market.
2 slabs worth of boar meat were only 5 wigums just the other day.
The plump, grey-haired pigeon cooed loudly towards the butcher's stall. The butcher fluffed his coxcomb and angrily clucked back at the older woman.
Take it or leave it, mum. Yesterday's prices aren't today's prices. You want cheaper boar meat? Then take your hind feathers over to the Black Forest and hunt for yourself.
Well, I've never. You young chicks today don't have any manners.
She shouted, while storming off. The rooster chuckled to himself. But Fowl's laughter soon ceased as an enormous shadowy figure cast over his butcher's stall.
Timothy Fowl. What is this I hear of you raising prices at will?
Micah's deep baritone voice caused the rooster to cluck nervously.
Sir Griffin, may the wings of the mother embrace you.
Micah nodded his head at the greeting but pressed forward with his questioning.
As I said, Brother Fowl, explain why your prices have just about doubled overnight.
The fowl trembled. Fearing Micah would seek justice for the elderly pigeon, he attempted to cheat before. Micah stood with his large, muscular arms folded over his chest. The fowl tilted his head back to look Micah in the eye, but strained as he looked upwards. Micah's oversized frame stood over 3 heads taller than most within the avian race. Despite him being odd among the avians, his pedigree and heritage herald from the mystical avian realm.
I.
The rooster was tongue-tied.
You what, brother fowl? Has there been a shortage of boar meat? No, there hasn't, because my men and I have hunted and supplied the capital with enough meat to fill the community silos.
Yes, Sir Griffin, the people of the capital, thank you.
Now that we have an understanding, lower your prices.
Micah leaned towards the fowl. His rough hands grasped the wooden edges of the stall so hard that it splintered under his force. The rooster's jaw dropped open in terror.
If I see or hear of you price gouging again, I'll inform the guild to redact your business privileges.
With a swift gesture, the fowl quickly removed the price placards. Then marked all his wares down 2 wiggums below the standard market value. With that settled, Micah continued making his way down to the trading port. Unfortunately, tonight was his shift to oversee the Imperial slave port. As Micah patrolled the market district, the eyes of commoners and nobles alike followed his every move. Some women eyed him with lust and promiscuity. Even a few of the capital's males did too. But there were more than several lords and merchants that loathed Micah Griffin. He was chivalrous, selfless, and a warrior through and through, which made it quite hard for slumlords and criminals to do their dark dealings on his watch. "What's this you got here?" squawked Gertrude Parakeet as she lifted the top covering the slave carriage. Sir Rohan slapped her hand away and shooed her further back.
Don't cause me any trouble today, Lady Parakeet. My shift is almost over. So let me have a few minutes of peace, eh?
Gertrude squawked in frustration, then walked off towards the red light district whence she came.
How goes it, brother Emu?
Micah walked towards Rohan. The setting sun caused the golden scales on his dark, tanned skin to glow faintly. Rohan smiled. The ragged scar on the right side of his face made it look more like a sneer.
A sight for sore wings, brother Griffin.
The two men locked their forearms and greeted each other with respect. Micah looked his subordinate over and shook his head. Rohan looked as if he had aged since the last time he'd seen him. His dark grey eyes were sunken with heavy bags underneath. Even his black beard and wings were untidy and unpreened. Micah smiled.
Let me guess, your clutch must have hatched?
Rohan laughed listlessly.
Is that your way of saying I look like shit, eh?
Rohan jabbed Micah in the side, then slapped his shoulder as they traded places.
Indeed, brother, the wings of the mother blessed Matilda and me with healthy hatchlings. I'll be off since you're here now.
Micah gave his old friend a head nod, then manned his station in front of the slavers' caravan. Nobody's slave. Nemala could hear the faint sound of crying and shouting. As she turned her head to the side, reality hit her. How is this possible? She slowly opened her eyes but was met with mostly darkness. The smell of filth and sweat made her gag. She raised her hand, attempting to cover her nose, but heavy metal chains were tightly bound around her wrists and ankles. Her eyes widened as her hands tugged and pulled on the rusted iron shackles. "What is this?" Nemala questioned out loud into the darkroom, but was met with silence. She banged the shackles on the cement once, then twice. Before her bloodied fist could slam down a third time, a frail, withered hand reached towards her. Nemala swiftly moved her arm away, then scanned the room once more. But still, there was nothing.
Child.
The gravely sound of an elder's voice came from the shadows. Nemala sat motionlessly, focusing her attention on the shadows. Now that she knew she wasn't alone, her vigilance intensified.
Fear not, child, for it is not as you should be wary of. Cease our noise, our doomed demons will surely come.
Nemala leaned further off the wall where she sat silently, peering harder into the darkness. As she leaned forward, the elder moved too. Her once shadowy figure was now bathed in the moonlight from a small slit on the adjacent wall. Long, grey matted hair hung hauntingly down her frail figure. Her pale, mottled skin was riddled with sores. Her face was hard to make out. The portion that wasn't hidden under her tangled mass of hair was covered in green and purple bruises. Nemala slowly shook her hand in understanding, then leaned back against the hard, cold wall. Silently Nemala sat watching. The once hidden figures were now more visible. 3 older females sat huddled to the left, furthest from the door. There were 7 elders with 5 or 6 small younglings to her right. But, mostly, everyone kept quiet. The whines and cries from the little ones would rouse her from her thoughts from time to time. But they were swiftly silenced by the elders. So, what were these winged demons? Nemala pondered to herself. Are they so terrifying that everyone stayed silent due to fear? Nemala shifted her body slightly, shifting her weight to the side to relieve the pressure on her lower back. Out of all the women here, Nemala was the only one chained. Do they see me as a threat because I look different from the rest of the women here? Nemala scanned the room once again, taking notice of the younger women's bright red hair. Even the younglings had thick, frizzy ruby red plaits. As she looked over at everyone in the room, her eyes met the dark hollow orbs of a grey-haired elder. Nemala shivered but didn't look away. Instead, the elder whispered something to the small child sitting on her lap. At the elder's words, the babe stood. The poor child was emaciated. Her cheeks were sunken in. The skin that covered her arms and legs looked as though the bones would slice through her skin with the slightest movement. The child slowly shuffled forward, carrying a small rag in her tiny hands. When the young child stood before Nemala, the smell of putrid meat and feces burned her nostrils. But Nemala smiled at the small child. For a moment, in the babe's forlorn eyes, there was a spark of joy. But it was soon replaced with an emotionless, blank stare.
Nana says you should eat. The rations were already given before you came. They won't be feeding us again until tomorrow night.
Her little hand clenched tightly to the wadded-up rag, but she still held it out before her as instructed. Nemala smiled at the youngling to put her at ease as she slowly unwrapped the bundle. The withered-up berries were covered in a bluish mold and a hard lump of what looked like dough. As Nemala looked the contents over, the young girl's stomach gurgled and growled. Yet she didn't show a bit of embarrassment. But why would she? After all, she'd been through. Nemala gratefully took the berries, then held the lump of dough to the mouth of the babe. Like a starving feral cat. She snatched it from Nemala's hand and swallowed it before she could say another word. Then hurriedly scampered back to the elder.
That was kind of you. But harden your heart, girl. The nice ones don't last long here. Worry about yourself and yourself only,
whispered one of the younger red-headed women. But Nemala couldn't make out who it was because they kept their bodies turned away from the door. She looked the elder's way, held up the berries, and mouthed a silent thank you. The elder nodded, then motioned for her to hurry and eat them. Then she pointed to her bloodied fist. Nemala didn't quite understand, so she looked at her in confusion.
The mold on the berries has healing properties. The last thing you want is for those cuts on your hand to turn rancid.
The elder chided. With that said, she quickly threw the berries into her mouth. Moments later, heavy footfalls and male voices came from the other side of the metal door. Why did this feel so familiar? The more Nemala tried to remember. Then, a piercing pain shot through her head. The door opened forcefully, and several blasts of wind barreled through us. The younglings cried as they clung to the frail bodies of the elders, while the older females screamed out in fear. Nemala steeled herself, watching and preparing for whatever entered. Once, the 2 men walked into the room. She turned her head to the side in bewilderment. The first one was stocky. The guard's fat, hairy belly protruded from the underside of his armor placard. His face, and the lanky man behind him, was hidden under the metal helmets they wore. But that wasn't what caused her confusion. For it was the large wings each of them sprouted from behind their backs. Demons, are these the things the elder spoke of?
Fuck me with a feather. It smells like shit and piss in here.
The lanky guard yelled. The fat one groaned, then pointed to the women towards the back.
It is not of our concern. A king wants free his stimmer. Grab and let us be off.
Ah, you're no fun, Purdy. At least let me wet my cock a bit.
The fat one scratched his belly, then grunted.
Yeah, I understand.
He grabbed at his nethers, then rubbed his belly before pointing to one of the bigger younglings.
It's take a little on. I don't care if any of his commission.
The small bulge in both of their pants didn't go unnoticed. The more they lusted over the babes, the louder the children and women wailed. Then, just as the lanky one went to grab the trembling child, Nemala rattled her chains. Both of them were startled. Their hands immediately went to the long swords at their sides.
Wings of the mother, when the fuck did she get here? The tall
Don't know. Her dark skin practically blends in with the brown wall. I have never seen nothing like her.
The other replied gruffly. As they neared, she purposely pushed her breast forward, giving them an ample view of her mounds. The tall one stopped walking and watched Nemala writhe about.
Was this one on the manifest last night?
He questioned. The fat one was too busy ogling her chest to reply.
I don't think so, but the merchant said he found something along the way. So maybe she is it.
Well, I'd rather fuck her than the tiny twat of a child.
The big one broke his attention towards her and looked back at the babes.
There's nothing like having a little under you, who? It makes you feel all powerful and strong.
Well, we all have our taste, eh?
Before the fat one could think further about harassing the child, she tugged on her tattered gown, letting her breast spill from the gown's opening. Both of the men let out a lust-filled sigh.
Looks like this one is greedy. She wants us both to herself.
Nobody's Slave Part 2.
You go search over there.
There's nothing here.
Geschäft established.
Micah wanted to know what had the Imperial Guards up in arms. He tried asking the first set of castle guards, who hurriedly ran past, but they ignored him. 3, then 6 more passed by. When the 8th guard tried to evade him, Micah blocked his way.
What's happening?
He barked at the guard. The crow tried to tug himself away, but Micah's firm grip kept him in place. The crow was about to spout off about the annoyance, until he realized who it was he was speaking to.
My apologies, Sir Griffin. It seems 2 of the king's guards were wounded and several slaves have run off.
Micah released the crow's arm.
I'll be on the lookout.
The guard tucked his uniform back in place, then ran off towards the courtyard. As he watched the disorderly guards muddling about, he shook his head. Were these truly the king's most trusted knights? After watching in pure disgust, Micah stretched his back, then unfurled his colossal white wings to prepare for flight. Unlike the other avian races, Micah's wingspan was similar to the royal families. They were so big that they would take 3 normal-sized avians to lift just one. It was for this reason that Micah didn't care about flying. It consumed too much of his energy and strength. Plus, Micah didn't want the king or the council to see him as a threat. He already knew many of the lords and nobles felt threatened by his size and power. But with the way these guards were fluttering about, none of the slaves would be caught before sunrise. So, with a swift leap, Micah flew up. The wind gust from his wings toppled over the empty carriages and horse troughs within the outer court.
Damn it.
Micah groaned.
The Grand Commander will surely try to take that from my wages.
Micah vigilantly flew throughout the capital. Finally, when he saw no signs of the fugitive slaves, he flew about 7 miles deep into the dark forest. There was no way the flightless, especially female ones, could venture further than that. Only he and his knight's order were crazy enough to hunt the wild animals and demons that dwelled within. Beyond the dark forest were the obsidian mines, and if one was brave enough to venture further, there was a volcanic wasteland with a sea of lava as far as the eye could see. Just as the 3 moons rested and the golden orb raised high in the sky, Micah did one last sweep over the tree line but still found nothing. He had done all he could, and his shift was ending. He was ready to call it quits and go home. For Mother was surely waiting with a cold glass of ale and hearty breakfast porridge. The dark forest. Throughout the lush, thick greenery of the forest, the sound of rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and panting was heard. Nemala carried not 1 but 4 babes, while the other 3 women carried a child each as they escaped into the dark forest. Either you keep up, or I leave you behind. I'm neither slave nor whore for no man, Nemala hissed. Finally, the women and elders cut out their complaints and ran as fast as their frail bodies would allow. Do any of you know this forest or know of a place we can go? Everyone shook their heads from side to side except the grey-haired elder.
I know of a place, but it is best if we keep moving. I can tell you about it once we find a place to sleep.
Nemala grunted, then gestured for the rest of the women to press on. The sound of water grew closer as they ran. The smell of wet soil and moss was revitalizing. Nemala took in deep lungfuls, pushing her body to keep moving despite the weight of the babes clinging to her for dear life.
I can hear a loud rumbling.
One of the older children cried out. Nemala looked left then right and listened harder. Is there a waterfall close by? The elder looked confused.
Yes, there is, but if I remember correctly, it should be a 4 months journey from the capital.
But we've been running less than 2 hours. So either your memory has aged, or it's not the waterfall you remember. She looked at the women behind her. Their pale white skin was bleeding from running through the thickets, and some babies had soiled themselves in fear. We don't have any other options. Either we press forth, or we all die. The females looked at Nemala with resolution and headed towards the falls.
There it is, over there.
The wee girl shouted out. Nemala raised her hand, silencing the child. Everyone looked at her with expectancy. Finally, Nemala unsaddled the children from her chest and handed them to the elders. Get low and do not come up unless I tell you. Do you understand? They answered with their eyes. Nemala crouched low, slowly moving ferns and leaves from her path, stepping on the moist soil and not the branches underfoot. Then, carefully, she approached the small lagoon, watching and waiting for any signs of guards. After she sat for a while and heard nothing, she cautiously approached the water's edge. The sound of crickets and croaking frogs was all that met her ears. Then her eyes fell to the water. Near her feet were several rocks and pebbles. She placed a few medium-sized stones into her hand, then looked to the side. At the far edge sat something that resembled a log. Nemala chucked the largest stone in that direction, striking what should have been a hollow log. But as soon as the rock struck, it slithered beneath the water's surface. Nemala grunted, then looked to her other side and did the same. A few more large creatures waded beneath the water as well. Since there were no other creatures around, Nemala assumed that they were at the top of the food chain, whatever those things were. She swiftly crept back into the bushes, where the females awaited her return. There's a waterfall, and I'm sure there's a cave behind it. The women's faces lit up with elation. But Nemala gestured for them to hush. Wait, and listen. There are creatures in the water, and that cave may be where they nest. The small girl she carried on her back gripped the hem of Nemala's gown.
Whenever an animal or demon came near us before, it always stayed away from you.
All the women shook their heads in agreement. Finally, the grey-haired elder shuffled forward and grabbed Nemala's hand.
I don't know what you are or who you are. But child, something within you has power. If the forest creatures are afraid of you, the water-dwelling ones might also fear you. It is weird a try.
Nemala couldn't answer that question herself, for she didn't know who she was or what she was. Just hours ago, she awoke in this strange place with these strange people. The only thing she was certain of was her name.